Well, I'm thrilled to be joined today by Suba Vasudevan, who currently serves as the CEO of Mozilla.org and is the Senior Vice President at Mozilla Corporation. She brings over 22 years of global leadership experience spanning technology, AI, trust and safety, and advertising. And at Mozilla Corp, she leads corporate strategy, operations, data science, and engineering, as well as monetization, including ad product engineering, sales, and business development. So lots to go over there. And we'll talk about her role as COO of Mozilla.org as well. And before Mozilla, Suba held senior leadership roles at Meta, where she managed strategy, quality, tooling systems, and analytics for multi-billion-dollar operations. She's launched pivotal products, scaled global integrity and compliance functions, and her expertise spans corporate growth, turnaround stages, P&L transformation, and risk management. So much to talk about. She's also deeply committed to advancing equity and community. She served as a sponsor of Women at Meta and a board member at Mainspring Schools in Austin. And she writes quite a bit on leadership and operational excellence. I'm also happy to announce that she is one of our main stage speakers at the 10th Annual Women in Product Conference on September 17th. So we get a little sneak peek today on what she's going to talk about and just who she is in general. So welcome, Suba, to the podcast.
Thank you, Carmen. That was quite the intro. I appreciate it. But I'm also excited to be on this podcast. I love the idea of what Women in Product is doing and has been doing for years. And of course, it was started by a former Meta leader. So I have that connection as well. But in general, this is, I think, a fabulous platform and a fabulous way of providing women in product a place to be with peers and learn from each other.
Yeah. So I want to talk about your early career journey because we talk about this in other places, but I think it's really important to first understand who you are, what makes you tick, like where do you come from? I know that you started out as a computer engineering student in Mumbai, and you've also worked as a journalist. So would love to hear how that sort of like very unique dual path shaped how you approach strategy and storytelling in tech.
Yeah, thanks for cueing me on that one and asking me that outright. I'll share this. It was like this mix of left brain, right brain for me, right? And I was at that time getting a full-time computer engineering degree while being a journalist. And it was a teen journalist, to be clear, but eventually I gravitated towards topics that were at the intersection of business and tech. So that sort of became a through line for me. And really, really, at the end of it, the real through line was curiosity, learning how to ask better questions, and always asking the question, what is the real problem we're trying to solve for? If you think about it, that's what an engineer does, as they say, debug code. That's what a journalist has to do as they cut through the noise and actually present a compelling story in that moment for their readers. For me, that through line then helped me be successful as I went to KPMG, worked there for a decade in their risk advisory services practice, so professional services, and then moved to Meta, where I took on a slew of roles over time, like the ones you mentioned. That those skill sets that I learned in that mix of computer engineering and journalism held true through all of those careers. And then about 11 years ish at Meta, and it still held true for me at Mozilla.
Yeah, I love that. It's interesting when you talk about the little nuggets from like what is the problem you're trying to solve and that curiosity. As we speak with emerging product leaders, it's all those through lines. So love to hear that. Can you walk me through your path in your own words and maybe like one or two pivots that you think were really critical to shape where you are and what you do now?
Yeah. One thing I forgot to mention is along the way of all of that, I have raised and continue to raise twins, which is not easy. I don't know if I would consider that a pivot, perhaps, or maybe that's just extending, expanding, and a new part of my identity that I continue to push forward as I evolved. I evolved as a leader at work while learning to be a mom at home, right? So one pivot for me comes from those days. My kids were a year old, not even, and I changed jobs during absolutely sleepless years. That was a big pivot for me when I went from KPMG to then Facebook. Then Facebook were still in hyperscaling mode. This was in 2012. That wasn't a joke. But I went there because I had all this energy that I wanted to build something different from what I had done at KPMG. And it allowed me to be oddly both a better mom at home and hopefully a good leader at work by evolving those two paths at the same time. So each of those chapters, I think, in my life has taught me to stay true to who I am, to adapt quickly, to know that we as women have the superpowers and shouldn't shy away from it. Of course, along the way, Carmen, I have asked for a ton of help from parents, from other resources, other moms, etc. But that part, while at work you may stay principled, at and both at work and at home, you've got to stay human. So that's how I think about it. I'm sure other women empathize with similar pivots as well.
No, I agree with that. It's almost like you add additional layers to the superpowers that you have and ones that you don't necessarily expect to grow in those ways. Like you changed your company while having the twins. That's a lot of change. They always say that the two most stressful things are changing jobs and moving. And I definitely think that it should be added on birthing and taking care of and having children. So I agree with you that, especially for our community, it's almost like you have to go into a hyper prioritization that we always do with these different elements. So I love that.
And you know what's interesting, Carmen? When I told coworkers at my then alma mater that I was leaving to go work at Facebook, actually, they didn't even hear the Facebook part. You know what they heard? They were like, "Oh, is it because you're a new mom and the hours are too much?" I was like,
Wow.
"Are you kidding me? Do you know where I'm going? I'm going to be going to work at a hyperscaler tech company that is really coming into its own." This was 2012 Facebook, a rocket ship that was just launching off. And the kinds of questions I got, I almost laughed in their faces. I was like, you don't know how bored I am in my current chapter and how desperately I want to help my brain grow and
Mhm.
keep learning in my next chapter. This has nothing to do with my home life. And so some of those assumptions that people made, it's fascinating to me even till date when I had those kind of questions.
Yeah, I think that the curiosity, the continuous learning, and I'm excited to get into this now in industry with things moving so quickly, with models changing and learning so quickly. It's an amazing time to have that skill set of being so curious and wanting to drive impact. There's a lot of opportunity here. But before we go into that, I had this curiosity. You hold this unique dual role today as COO of Mozilla.org, as well as SVP at Mozilla Corporation, running all of those different business lines and such. Can you walk us through what does that look like in practice? And then how do you think about connecting the corporate strategy and operations and the monetization and even the board level governance across those two entities?
Yeah. So Mozilla.org is the holding company at the top. I have the COO role there. And then one of the largest commercial portfolio companies that we have is Mozilla Corporation in the portfolio, which has products like the Firefox browser, Anonym, which is an advertising ad tech privacy product and or platform, and so on. And so we have a number of products both within Mozilla Corporation, where I have the other or the SVP role that you mentioned, and we have a bunch of other portfolio companies. For me, at the end of the day, the commonality is very simple. It's about thinking about the future of Mozilla. It's a storied, revered, decades old brand. I came here to help enact a transformation along with my peers and other leaders around me. And it doesn't matter where I sit on any given day. I am thinking about how is this going to help the future of Mozilla and make us modern and help us be this amazing, cool, modern, sustained, thriving brand for the future. It doesn't matter if it's at the holding company level, if it's within a portfolio company like Mozilla Corporation. I may have multiple responsibilities, but again, on this note of through lines, I seem to be talking about through lines all the time today. But the through line here is each of these roles requires me to be thinking about what's 5 years ahead and then backtracking into, therefore, what's the strategy for the next 3 years and the plan for the next year? And then how do we actually operate in the today and in the moment? What's fascinating to me is when I took this role, it wasn't for both roles. Both roles didn't exist in the way they exist today. I took the Mozilla Corporation role in order to help with the transformation because our then CEO talked to me about a set of problems. So I came in as strategy and ops leader to solve a set of problems. And here I am having crafted a whole bunch of things and two roles that I'm playing in. Needless to say, for a lot of people, this is about seeing the opportunity, especially for a lot of women, for seeing the opportunity and making sure that you make what you can of it. In my case, the opportunity was not just about helping Mozilla, but what could I learn along the way as well? Because I've been very focused on how am I constantly learning and growing my brain while adding value to any employer that I'm a part of. So that's a little bit about what I do in my roles. I'm happy to go deeper.
No, for sure. I definitely want to jump into more of like into the strategy and operations components. So you're leading modernization across strategy and ops. That's what we just talked about. But how are you thinking about where Gen AI could live in that broader framework, especially as you're thinking about 5 years from now versus 3 years from now versus right now, and so much happening right now? How do you apply that Gen AI component into that planning?
Yeah. So I came to Mozilla in August of 2023. Even then, I was shocked with how many people didn't fully understand the potential and the power of the AI moment that was staring us in the face. Because by then, ChatGPT had launched its models. It had been almost a year, not even a full year, but almost a year. You had Claude, you had Gemini, you had so much going on in the space of Gen AI. It was fascinating how many people in the world had not fully understood the potential of what this means and meant even back then for everybody. So even today, I hold true or stick firmly to the fact that Gen AI in strategy and operations, or any of my roles, or anything Mozilla does, is not a side piece or a sidebar conversation. It absolutely is important both for our products and the modern future of our products that I keep talking about, as important as it is for our internal operations, our processes, and very importantly for how people innovate. Because one mistake that I see leaders making often is thinking of Gen AI as this quick fix tool for efficiency, when in reality, I see it and Mozilla sees it not as an efficiency play only, but as an efficiency play for human beings, which means how can any human being automate the hell out of their repetitive tasks, make that go away in a way, or maybe outsource that to a little bit of this chatbot, and at the same time take on the more creative, innovative, mentally taxing solutions and problems that they need to solve for. That's how I look at it at Mozilla on any given day in any of the roles that I'm in. It's about giving access to employees to those tools, but also help make us all sharper day to day on topics we didn't even know we could be sharp at. So I'm an optimist, a tech optimist. I'm a Gen AI optimist, and I love building safety, privacy, user agency, all of that upfront into anything we do, which is where my brand of optimism comes from.
For sure. And I want to definitely jump into the safety and privacy component.
Yeah.
But I did want to say for our listeners, very specifically, when people say, well, should we just add Gen AI? How do you specifically move to anchor that conversation back to clarity and purpose? Because I think that this is where lots of our product folks are facing, hey, how do we apply AI? How do we apply Gen AI? What would be your recommendation and approach to bring it back to clarity and purpose?
What's the problem we're solving for? That's the question I would ask. And I would recommend everybody ask any person, any leader, any woman in product, any product person who's solving for this. Please ask that question. Even if you think you know the problem, it might be very different. And I'll say this for a reason. There are different tools, there are different products that are uniquely good at solving for different things, right? And as humans, we all have a different idea, notion, misunderstanding even of what Gen AI helps us solve for. So if the answer is fuzzy on any of those, on the tools themselves or what the humans want, then we're probably in a gray territory that needs resolving. By the way, being in the gray area, that's going to take a while. We're going to be there for a very long time. Nothing wrong with that. But we need some resolution on why do we need AI here? Is this already automatable through some old fashioned means? You know what I mean? Do you just not have automation? Or is it a personal productivity thing? Or are you just succumbing to the hype, right? I would ask those basic sets of questions. Once that's been asked, absolutely, I do think the future is bringing in Gen AI, both into an employee's day to day as well as business and engineering practices, like I've talked about before.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I had heard the terminology of the Gen AI theater. So thank you for covering like how do you actually walk through that. So in addition, how would you ensure alignment across the functions? Because it's one thing to sort of have the point of view and know how to, handle the conversation, but then how do you align across the functions, whether it be product or engineering or privacy policy, and particularly for a feature that is powered by AI?
Yeah. And by the way, Carmen, this is something I'm sure a lot of women in product are talking to you. I'm excited to come and talk about it with folks as well as hear from everybody. And so I'm hopeful there are some conversations in this space. You also mentioned Gen AI Theater. I just want to stop on that, dwell on that for 1 second. There are features that sound cool but don't land. There are questions that feel like they weren't asked timely. That's what leads to so-called theater. But there is a simple set of filtering questions anyone can ask. That filter might vary from company to company, size of company, complexity, vendors you're negotiating with, etc. But it boils down to questions around what is the value for users? How is this going to help with differentiation if it's for a product and it's external facing?
Mhm.
Or is it about durability for an internal business or engineering process or practice, right? Will this matter in a year? And how will we keep it going? So there are many frameworks you can apply here, but I just wanted to quickly dwell on that point of Gen AI theater. And then you asked me about alignment across functions. I think this one's important because a lot of times, and we can talk about culture as well, cultural barriers are a big thing. But guess where you can actually make progress with those barriers? By being aligned across functions and getting buy in from several folks that matter. So, to me, that's sort of, in a way, the unglamorous type of work that operators do all day long. It's a superpower, right? That product managers are pulling on and pushing for all day long. This reminds me of a time, working in trust and safety for many years at Meta. A lot of teams tried to bolt that on onto the end of a process. But the teams that were on the inside fighting for trust and safety and integrity always pushed for that to not be an afterthought and instead be built in upfront. And that's what we're doing at Mozilla, right? Your goal should not be about rewiring something as you're building it. It should be, let's build this plane right, even if we're mid flight. So to me, at Mozilla, and even at Meta, the way we did it was bring those stakeholders in upfront. Everybody is party to the same conversations. And yes, some teams won't have the time. That happens. It doesn't have to feel slower. I actually think it cuts down on the game of telephone. So I'm all for that. So anything that cuts down on rework after the fact or thrash by way of game of telephone or pairwise conversations, you're literally building trust into the process from day one. And that to me is such an essential part of a product manager's job and even an operator's job. It really does separate teams that succeed from the ones that don't. Take all of that I said and apply it to a concept like operationalizing Gen AI at work. Each and every one of those statements is true, no matter what the problem is you're solving. So, whether it's trust and safety, whether it's Gen AI at work, some other automation problem, product building problem, the fundamental principles of alignment, I would say, still hold true.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. And I remember when I was looking back at your background in trust and safety, especially everything that's happening right now in the ability to launch AI products that your users and your audience are really going to trust and want to use. It's so critical. So thank you. That really connects, I think, the role that leaders play in shaping the conversation. So let's jump into how thought leadership and alignment and how you've looked at thought leadership and alignment across your organization. You've spoken about thought leadership as an essential to transformation. And it's not just about visibility, but really driving that transformation within an organization. So, how do you model and encourage that level of leadership to your teams?
Yeah. That's an interesting one. And I've definitely evolved over the years as a leader myself. And I'm also always looking around and learning from other people. With that preamble, let me say this. When it comes to change, I've always told my teams change is the only constant in life, and all roadmaps are kind of dynamic, right? They can't be static. And especially when you're in a growing tech company or in a transformation moment or whatever. So if you take those two things and if they have to be true, what also has to be true is you can't just drop change on people. People have to understand the why, the how, the principles behind the change, and why it matters, all of that stuff, right? So, partly leadership is about being principled, knowing those principles, and sharing them, the narration behind it, right? At Mozilla, the nice part is we've always been about user choice and agency and our manifesto, which is a set of principles, if you want to look at it that way. Our goal is to build with purpose for the users, give users agency and choice. But none of that has to come at the cost of speed. None of that comes at the cost of boldness, right? So, as a leader, to me, all of these qualities are important as you package them and you scale them through your team. The other thing, Carmen, I'll just add is sometimes people misunderstand. They think that leadership is about the loudest voice in the room. I would argue that, in fact, it's not. It's about the person who knows to be the clearest. You asked me about clarity earlier. I would say the person who can set the clearest tempo in the room is the leader that people are going to follow.
I love that. I think that's amazing. I think that especially in our community, we do get a lot of questions around how do we do that? And I wanted to say that what you said is an important reminder. Those of us who are feeling a lot of pressure from like their stakeholders in terms of pushing AI, I'd like to like sort of shift into some additional practical advice that you have. So for our community, especially those who are feeling that pressure, what are some of the mindset shifts or some of the frameworks that you would recommend as they're going into these discussions and building out their roadmaps and they're trying to manage across and up through their leadership?
Yeah. Let me give you examples from having or continuing to lead the ads product team here at Mozilla, product engineering, all of it, and also some of the tooling and analytics functions at Meta, the ones that at least I had. I always come back to grounding questions because those grounding questions form the basis for your principles. One of them, as I've said twice or thrice before already, what's the real problem we're trying to solve for? And then the other one is wearing my future thinker hat and saying, what must we do now to be successful a few years from now? It could be 3 years, it could be 5 years. And then I would add a third, what are the barriers, right? Working with my product teams to think in that manner has helped isolate some of the confusion or isolate some of the chaos around, oh my God, I want to build this, but I'm facing all these mountains that seem, that you can't cross those mountains or climb them at the time. But in reality, by breaking it down into these pieces, it makes those barriers so much easier. And what we've learned oftentimes is those barriers are cultural. They're about long-standing practices at times, or they're about people just not knowing how to proceed or waiting on someone else to make the decision. It could be anything depending on the company, but good leaders immediately see the cut through and know how to find that line out. Good leaders should be able to see, and by the way, I'd say good product managers should be able to see this as well, the silos or the risk aversion or the fear of failure, and then help others tackle it. So that's how I would think about advice for product leaders, right? Because you sometimes feel that stakeholder pressure.
Mhm.
Instead, I want leaders, no matter whether it's you're tackling a Gen AI topic or building a product or solving for something else, even if it's an incremental product change internally, ground it in your mission, your users, and anchor it on that 3 year horizon. But also don't underestimate the power of culture and cultural changes at work.
Yeah, I think that there's an element there, obviously an element there of the storytelling and really getting to what each of your different stakeholders are interested in, also like where are their concerns and discomforts, and being able to read that and tell that story around it. Because to your point, I think that ties back to our discussion on thought leadership and why do you believe that and why should you go there? And it's bringing along all of those stakeholders with you so that you can actually accomplish that goal. Because I think that cultural part is really important.
Without that, the best technical roadmaps are not going to stick. You can keep trying.
Yeah.
So you do need the culture and the change and the people to be brought along.
Yeah, amazing. So here's something a little more specific. So like if a small team wanted to, let's say, experiment with Gen AI and had limited resources, what do you think is one way to test for real user and mission alignment without like overscoping? So like for your teams, like how do you encourage this?
Yeah. So I would ask, experimenting with Gen AI, is that for external facing products and users, or is that for internal tooling and re-engineering of business processes? That's the first set of things to understand. Hopefully, as a leader of a team, you have a specific mandate, so that part is clearer. But one thing that I would say you have to constantly think about is, what are we solving for our users? And how are we meeting our users where they're at, or taking them into the future while giving them choice and while giving them agency? At least that's how Mozilla tends to think about product development. So for me, it's less about that minimum flashy demo. It's more about the actual minimum viable proof, right? I would like to see product teams not building a fully flashy integrated feature right away. Any product leader will tell you that. I would like to see us testing, whether it's a quick sprint model or whatever the model is that different companies follow, and then stage gate. Stage gate to be able to see, okay, does this proceed to the next gate? And the next gate is, can it come out of seed stage? Does it actually require more resources? What are we solving for? How is it going to help the next 3 years? And there's an art and a science to this. The science of it will be informed by your analysts or your data scientists or whoever. The art of it is where the strategy comes in. Like, how does this help the company? How does this help my product in the long run? How is it helping users in the long run? So that's what I would tell the small team if they wanted to experiment with Gen AI.
Amazing. One thing that I wanted to add, so you are covering so many different problems in your different roles. And I imagine that in your board of directors, you're probably around other product leaders or hopefully other women in product who are facing the same types of things. Would you say that there are some unique challenges that you're dealing with that you've really had to either educate and share? And what are some of the other types of challenges that you see others facing who are in either like similar or peer roles?
Yeah, I would say two things. One is absolutely the cultural barrier, right? And that can be broken down into so many elements. Cultural barrier, by the way, does not always boil down to people just being naysayers. That's not it. For a lot of people, it is, I tested a thing or a tool 6 months ago. It was of no use. It wasted my time or it was not accurate. I'm just not going to take the time to do it again. And that means you've got to resell it to that cohort of people or help them relearn. And that brings me to the point of the most powerful thing around today's AI stage or Gen AI world that we live in is peer influencing, peer learning within companies, and being able to demo what's even possible. So that's
Mhm.
something we talk a lot about when it comes to internal adoption of Gen AI specifically. I'm on that thread. And a lot of times boardroom conversations are about how to help leaders accelerate their internal adoption of Gen AI, not to mention making products very AI centric for their users. So Firefox, for example, is going to have a ton of cool things coming out in the future, which we'll share over time. But those are the kinds of conversations every board is pushing their leaders on in those rooms. So I think it's our jobs as either leaders or just product leaders and product thinkers is to help enable our leadership and each other on these topics. Every time there's a new inflection point, a new wave of technology that is here to stay, just like this wave is, it's our job to both get up to speed, help each other, and help the entire company shift forward with the right momentum.
So I think that the adoption, the implementation, the bringing in of Gen AI into organizations is still relatively nascent. I mean, yes, we've been ML, AI have been around for a long time, but um, our approaches and how much we want to incorporate and how much it's part of our tooling and part of the experience is still relatively new. So I'd imagine that in your experience, you've already taken some approaches and sort of learned like, wait a second, that wasn't really the right approach. So what are some of those like pitfalls and those approaches that you've taken that you've already sort of, hey, I might actually not do it that way?
Yeah. So I will share a little bit more about this, of course, when I'm talking to women in product in person on stage. But I'll just start with a little bit of the basics right now. The pitfalls start from, like I said before, cultural barriers. When two people are on polar opposite ends of this is valuable, this is not, why are we doing this? All of those questions. Or even, is this a waste of time? I've already tested it, etc. So to me, right now, we're in a moment where deployment is table stakes. Whether you're a large company, you're a mid-market company, and by the way, different companies are choosing to do it differently. Some are going fully top down, right? Anyone can deploy AI now. What people should be worried about is vendor lock-in. And what
Hmm.
happens when those vendors are going to change things on you and you're completely locked in with a particular one and overly reliant on them? That's something we don't have the answer for, but we'll continue to advocate for that as Mozilla to have choice, right? And then as a leader, coming back to your question, what matters, I also think, is narration and communication over and over again. That is one of the things both our CEO, Laura, and some of us, my peers, and I did over and over again in the last 18 months alone is talk about Gen AI, continue to show results, continue to show value, examples, have the early believers and the techno optimists demo for their peers and talk about it, create the buzz, have trainings, etc. Without that buzz, you're literally not going to go anywhere, especially if it's top down. Maybe that works in some cultures. Why this use case or why use it at all? How are you building it responsibly? Who does it ultimately serve? Being able to talk about it is what ultimately earns alignment and trust inside the company and outside it, right? For your products with your users. Otherwise, without that, you're just shipping features or you're forcing a change on people. You're not actually building confidence and momentum. And those are some of the lessons I'm happy to share more and more with leaders.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's like having the conversations and the deep conversations and having the arguments to get there and to bring people along with you again goes back to telling that story and enabling you to actually do the execution. Because I hear you. I think that there are a lot of elements about let's ship features. And I'm sure that you've heard and read about the different podcasts of like, hey, now we have more, it's the PMs who are slowing things down. And so they're blocking. We need to have more PMs to engineers because they can build so fast. I think when we're talking about like those conversations, that's really critical in the storytelling and what it is that we're actually doing. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I don't know about the more PMs to engineers. My PM team absolutely sent it to me. I would say, again, it comes back to the fundamental framework, the filter, right? What is it that we're solving for? Why does it have to be done this way? And where is that going to take us in 3 to 5 years? Is it more PMs to engineers? Which means, are those PMs going to be technical? Are they going to be coding as well? What does this mean for PMMs, TPMs? None of that is clear. I'm not in favor of just throwing a concept out there like we need more PMs to engineers. And instead, I almost want to look at every single use case by use case, and solve for it in that manner. A PM team might be out there telling you, hey, I can give you, I'm making this up by the way, 35% more efficiency by just using Gen AI every single day in every business process, every meeting, every piece of research. And that 35% of my productivity, I'm going to go deeper on a technical concept and
Mm.
almost be a TPM or even, go face customers more and help a PMM person more. So they might choose to expand their horizons and innovate differently with that time. That is also something I'm hearing from PM teams. So it's a little bit hard to say there is one size fits all. Perhaps for some companies, depending on where they're at, they need it. The one thing I'd be wary of and cautious around is it a bubble? Are people going to throw people at this problem right now just to get everything Gen AI'd? It's my term, or put AI in at work and make it all AI based automation and then say goodbye to those very people? I don't know, but those are all the warning bells that go off when I hear things like that.
Yeah, I think that this one's a really important conversation because the way we do work and the makeup of your team may evolve, but I still think it goes back to, and you've said this multiple times, it goes back to like, what is the problem you're trying to solve, even in the context of your teams? Like, what do you actually need to understand your customer, understand the market, understand what you can do now and what you can control? So I think that's a very important conversation as far as what the makeup of our teams are, what the roles are going to be, and how to evolve. And I do think that getting to what is the problem you're trying to solve is really the most critical thing. And it goes back to your point about the most important thing, or at least for you, is curiosity and the wanting to learn and all of that growth. So I hope for our community that really resonates, and we'll talk more about that at the conference. I'm sure this is an ongoing conversation. So as we move on, I did want to like jump into some rapid fire and just, some of the things that I'd love to know and that we love to ask our guests and leaders in the community. But what is one piece of advice from earlier in your career that still leads you today?
Yeah, you mentioned learning, I would say, or curiosity. I would say that's it, right? It's about learning and constantly building your skill sets. That to me is the most valuable thing anyone can have in their career lifetime or even in their personal lives. So early on, for a lot of people, it's about where do I go next? Or what's the next career jump? Or what's the next move I can make? And me too, like that was absolutely part of my process and still continues to be that way. Everybody should be thinking about what's good for them, what gives them momentum, but it's also the skills you stack. So I would say it's the skills you stack, what you learn, and then the allies you build. Who's your village? Who are the people you can call when you're at a career crossroads? Who are the people you can call when you have a really deep situational problem to solve, right? Those are all important things that you need to build through your career. And that's the best advice I can give someone. Because early on at KPMG, a wise partner actually gave me advice saying, so who's got your back on this one? Who's got your back when you go to a C suite member and tell them everything they've been doing is wrong? Turns out in this case, she, of course, had my back, but that unlocked for me the allyship aspect as much as the learning and skill stacking aspect. And I hope that I've carried that through KPMG into Facebook or Meta and now Mozilla. And that would be my advice for everybody.
I love that. And it is so true that it takes a while sometimes to build your personal board of directors or your network. And you don't necessarily know sometimes you might need someone to help you later down the line. And as long as you built that relationship earlier on and cultivated it, it's important. So it's never too early to start and it's never too late to start as well. So I really love that. So for you, another question, what's the favorite AI experiment that you've done, either whether it's you or your team, or even like things that you've done out in the wild?
Yeah, I'll give you a personal one. So I've been telling my husband for a while now, for years actually, that, if something were to happen to one of us, the other person would need to run the household. We need standard operating procedures for the house. And, the one thing was the two of us sit down and brain dump everything into a Google Doc or whatever. This was back in the day. Finally, I was thinking about it one day and said, maybe I just dump everything into ChatGPT. But then he said, hold on, I'll do one better than that. And one weekend, and he's not a coder, but he vibe coded an entire app for me on home management. And I helped him improve it as his product ideator and partner on the side. And we both laughed a little, but it is actually a very useful app. That way, we're not calling and texting each other. We just go to the app and see, did we pay the lawn guy or do we need to call the AC guy? What's going on here? It started as a bit of a joke and planning for life, and it's been surprisingly useful. But that's a great example of an experiment in the wild that's turned out to be of complete value, all thanks to Gen AI.
For sure. I think that it's a really exciting time, especially for product people and idea people, because when we go to our day-to-days we have problems and inefficiencies in every moment, I feel like, in our lives. So the ability now to be able to take something like, oh gosh, that's so frustrating, and be able to like build a solution that can potentially handle it is super exciting. So, what are you most excited in general in the context of AI and its applications, whether it's for you or if it's for your organization?
Yeah. So, both from a personal productivity perspective as well as an organization perspective, I think it actually cuts through communication and provides clarity much faster. But you've got to know how to use it because at the end of the day, it's garbage in, garbage out, right? I am excited about it giving people back time and allowing people to use that time to do less boring, repetitive things, learn new things, get sharper at topics they didn't know they could be sharp at, and really channel that energy towards creativity, towards connection building, towards influencing and moving faster on solutions. I'm really hoping what this does for the world is it's going to reskill people at work. Our kids, like mine are high schoolers, I worry about what skilling looks like for them. Hopefully, we're reskilling entire generations. And as a result, there's a lot more innovation at much faster speeds in the world. So for me, it's about shifting human attention to things that matter most, as opposed to the drudgery of what it might have been in before this.
I love that. I think we should have another podcast and discussion about Gen AI and our kids and what
No,
they think and how to manage it. That's just another episode we should dive into.
exactly.
But Suba, I just wanted to thank you for such an insightful conversation. I love your journey. You're so inspiring when you talk about thought leadership and how you actually drive that through in your organization. I can really see it. I can see what you stand for, all of the things that you've done in your past career, from leading monetization to trust and safety to your days as a reporter, that all of these things really come into your ability to lead and drive change. I'm so excited that you will be at our Women in Product conference and taking the stage so we can dig deeper into this for our audience. So what a great insight into the window of what you're doing at Mozilla and a roadmap for leaders everywhere to really adopt a lot of these insights and bring those things forward. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us, and we'll be back with another episode. Thank you so much, Suba.
Thank you, Carmen. I'm excited to be talking at Women in Product. I love what it has done for women in product. And I'm hopeful for some exciting conversations on both the topic of Gen AI, but also what generations of product leaders can do for future generations. I'm also excited for everybody to learn more about Mozilla and our future as we are at the conference. So thank you, Carmen.
I love it. Thank you so much.
This podcast is an original production of Women in Product. Follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or the Women in Product YouTube channel. Leave us a review so that others can discover us, or share this episode with someone you know. Original music provided by Jimmy Hahn. Thanks for joining us.